Aer Lingus announces temporary layoffs at Shannon Airport. The first day back for hundreds of thousands of school pupils. It's the first stage of phased school reopenings.
I feel excited and happy.
They have to get back at some stage, I suppose. Need a bit of more normality.
Rank and file Gardaí call for an urgent meeting with the Commissioner and Justice Minister after this weekend's anti-lockdown protest in Dublin. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is found guilty of corruption by a Parisian court, although it's unlikely he'll serve any jail time. And in sport, Gordon Elliott issues an apology as Irish racing authorities condemn the picture of the trainer sitting on a dead horse. Good evening. Bank of Ireland says the rise in demand for online banking is behind its decision to close over 100 branches in the Republic and in the North. The process will start later in the year. The bank says customers will be offered in-person alternatives through a new partnership with An Post. But the move has been criticised by groups like the Irish Farmers Association. It says it's a slap in the face for rural Ireland.
Castle Island in County Kerry. This is one of 103 Bank of Ireland branches that are set to close, and local people are disappointed.
It's very handy here, it's just on my doorstep really, you know, and I'm getting old and I don't travel into Tralee that much at all, but I really miss this one when it's gone.
It's another nail in the coffin for the people out in the country. People in the city seem to be looked after well better than the people in the countryside. Country people need our banks.
The post office and Garda stations and everything will finish up with nothing. Like you see, what they're trying to do is put it all online, and that's okay for the young people, but it's no good to the old people.
There's hardly nobody here, as you can see. The chemist, our shop above Sintra, only for that shop, there'd be nothing.
Rural Ireland has been abandoned, says the farming organisations. The decision compounding the closure of post offices and Garda stations. Bank of Ireland says footfall at its branches has fallen by half over 3 years, something undoubtedly exacerbated by the pandemic.
So today we're also announcing a very important strategic partnership with the An Post, which will see cash services like withdrawal of cash from accounts or lodgements available across the 900 post offices throughout.
But it is not just small rural towns that are affected. The busy commuter hub of Selbridge in County Kildare is also set to lose a branch.
I was shocked, and the residents are shocked. I'm not getting numerous calls from residents of Selbridge and businesses in Selbridge, because it's going to affect everyone. I fail to understand why with a population of 22,000 would be affected by the closure here.
Workers' representatives say the deal with An Post to replace some services won't be enough, and they're campaigning for the closures to be put back until next year at the earliest.
An Post operates with the other two main banks, Ulster Bank and AIB, and provides a complementary service. And we think if it was complementary, we'd be supportive of it, but in a replacement term, it won't work.
With the departure of Ulster Bank in the near future, Ireland is set to lose over 170 of its bank branches.
Well, for more on what this means, our economics correspondent Paul Colgan is here. And Paul, another big move in the banking sector in this country. Was this going to happen anyway, and did the pandemic just sort of speed things up?
Well, certainly Bank of Ireland has been looking to reduce its branch network and reduce its costs, as are many banks. And that simply is the state of banking right now. Combine it with Ulster Bank's announcement that it's going to leave the Republic. It has 88 branches. Today we have another 88 branches that are set to close, 174 in total. So that has a big impact on people's lives, and it reflects the changing nature of how people bank. The bank says that increasingly people are just not going to bank branches. However, you did hear in that report how it's going to affect older people who feel comfortable and secure going to a bank branch to deal with a bank official when they're conducting their business, and the impact this will have. And also some criticism that perhaps Bank of Ireland used the pandemic and the fact that people weren't leaving their homes, weren't going to bank branches, perhaps as further evidence to carry out this move. But certainly that is the direction that the banking sector is headed in and has been for some time, unfortunately.
So we've had news from Aer Lingus this evening, temporary job losses. Yes,
so the airline has announced that it's temporarily laying off ground crew and cabin crew for 3 months at Shannon. And this reflects the dire straits that the aviation sector finds itself in. These workers had been on the wage subsidy. We now understand that they're going to simply receive the pandemic unemployment payment. Aer Lingus will be hoping that with vaccinations around Europe and in Ireland, that the aviation sector gets back to some meaningful business later in the year, and hopefully it can bring these people back, 129 staff, back properly.
All right, Paul, thanks very much for that. Now, it was back to school for the first time this year for hundreds of thousands of pupils right across the country today. Primary classes from junior infants through to second class returned today, along with Leaving Cert students. Our reporter Paul Quinn has been speaking to parents, teachers and students today.
For 8-year-old Tim O'Callaghan, today couldn't have come quick enough. After 10 weeks, it was time to get his uniform back on, the school bag was ready, and head out the door with his mum for the short walk to school for the second class pupil at St Thomas's Junior School in Lucan.
So I'm looking forward to getting back in class, seeing what work we have, and I'm really excited in general.
Just over 250,000 primary school children returned to the classroom today in the first phase of a planned reopening.
Who are you excited to see?
My best friends Aidan and Billy.
Oh, and what was it like being at home all this time?
It was the worst.
I feel excited and happy.
They have to get back at some stage, I suppose. Need a bit of more normality.
I think they need to get back, bit of normality back in, can go back to work and continue on.
Parents have been urged not to congregate at the school gates or have any play dates or after school activities.
Now, we have a lot of control measures in place, all that are possible to have in place to mitigate against the risk of the virus in the school.
Over at the education campus in Maynooth, Leaving Cert students were settling back in. They're among 60,000 back in the classroom today.
You actually would miss having people. Like, it's great to get the social interaction. It's definitely a challenge learning through a screen.
I suppose there are still challenges ahead with getting back into the school routine, getting up early, mask wearing, all that sort of thing.
The coming weeks are set to be a busy time for students and teachers.
It's worrying and having to juggle it all. So I'm a German teacher, so we have orals coming up over Easter, and the students deciding will they take the exam, won't they take the exam.
While special schools have also returned to full capacity, groups representing 20,000 young people with additional needs between 3rd class and 5th year said they've been left behind. All going well, all primary school children and 5th years will return to class in 2 weeks' time. Paul Quinn, Virgin Media News.
Well, Ireland is approaching a second year of COVID-19 restrictions. On March 12th last year, the then Taoiseach Cleo Varadkar announced the closure of schools, colleges and childcare facilities. Since the first case was confirmed here on February 29th, the number has grown to over 200,000 with over 4,000 deaths. Tonight, a special documentary reflecting the last year through the eyes of frontline workers by our news correspondent Zara King airs here on Virgin Media 1 at 10 o'clock tonight.
12 months of unrelenting pressure.
The staff are just exhausted from it. I mean, they've put up with this for a year, putting themselves at no small personal risk to look after these patients, and they're just, at this stage, they're exhausted.
Staff on the front line seeing firsthand the devastating consequences of COVID-19.
COVID's probably precipitated some of those heart problems.
Tonight, Virgin Media News goes inside St Vincent's University Hospital.
Have you got 2 patients, Marie?
Yeah.
Wearing our cameras, porters, nurses, healthcare assistants and consultants show us the pandemic from their perspective and reflect on the last 12 months.
I think even the first patient who was positive for the virus but didn't necessarily have symptoms, when they were being moved around the hospital, it was a major operation. Porters would be closing all the doors down the corridor. It was almost like the plague had descended upon the place.
I was known as a COVID port. I was taking all the COVID patients where they had to go for it, wherever they were going around the hospital, you know. It was busy enough at the start, you know.
All right, well, let's admit her.
Recalling those first few weeks, staff say they never realised how it would play out.
It nearly kind of overpowered us as a staff. And there were times that inside the COVID area, there was a lot of people queuing outside with really bad symptoms. And you kind of your heart just breaks, you know.
What amazes me is the personal sacrifices that staff make to come to work.
Behind every frontline worker is a family at home who supports their loved one but is equally concerned.
I know even from my own kids it's definitely had an effect on them, because obviously at a young age they're worried about mum and dad.
ED consultant John Cronin and his wife Dr Eilish Condon both went to work on COVID-19 last year. At home were 3 young children, trying to process and understand what was happening.
I used to watch the news every evening because I wanted to know what was going on, so I'd have a rough idea, you know. They're kind of treating COVID patients pretty much every day. And I was a bit nervous that they might catch the virus or something.
I was worried that one of them would get it or that something terrible would happen.
Vaccine rollout brings with it great hope, and as the country prepares to reopen in the coming months, staff on the front line are feeling cautious, knowing what they've seen in this past year.
Once the vulnerable populations have been vaccinated, the next big thing then will be when society reopens, what's going to happen.
Zara King, Virgin Media News.
And that documentary by our correspondent Zara King, marking the first anniversary of the pandemic in Ireland, will feature in a Tonight Show special here on Virgin Media 1. The programme will also feature reaction, debate and analysis as the COVID crisis continues to affect all our lives in every way. Nearly 4 million doses of the newest COVID-19 vaccine are being delivered to US states today. The first batches of the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine were sent out from a distribution centre in Kentucky this morning. Johnson & Johnson will deliver about 16 million more doses by the end of March and 100 million by the end of June. Though the new shot is easier to administer and requires only 1 dose, the Biden administration is not altering its distribution plans. Johnson & Johnson has applied for European approval. It's expected that the European Medicines Agency will make a decision later this month. A 32-year-old man has gone on trial at the Special Criminal Court, charged with murdering a man in Dublin 4 years ago. David Daithí Douglas was shot dead on Dublin's Bridgefoot Street in 2016 as part of the Hutch Kinahan feud. The prosecution alleges that Lee Canavan, with an address at Edenbrook in Rathfarnham, was the person who literally pulled the trigger.
Opening the trial, the prosecution said Daithí Douglas was at the counter of his partner's shoe shop on July 1st, 2016, when a gunman walked in and shot him 6 times. His daughter rushed to his aid and emergency services arrived, but the 55-year-old was pronounced dead in hospital a short time later. The court heard the murder weapon, a semi-automatic pistol, was left at his head with the hammer cocked. The serial number had been removed. The hitman is alleged to have fled the scene on foot from Bridgefoot Street to nearby Oliver Bond Street and was seen getting into a car which drove off at speed. It's the state's case that the gunman was Lee Canavan, who was arraigned before the Special Criminal Court this morning. When the charge of murder was put to him, he replied not guilty. The prosecution told the Special Criminal Court that Lee Canavan was the person who literally pulled the trigger and shot David Daithí Douglas, and the trial would hear evidence that he was forensically connected to the getaway vehicles and could be identified on CCTV footage on the day of the murder. Prosecution counsel Sean Gallan said the court would be able to infer that the accused and others were involved in a carefully planned assassination. The court heard 4 vehicles were of major relevance to the case. The prosecution said the cars and their occupants acted in concert throughout the day of the murder, that it was carefully and meticulously planned, with a variety of roles assigned to ensure that 55-year-old Daithí Douglas would meet his death in the circumstances that he did. It's alleged that Lee Canavan is also linked to the destruction of one of the 4 vehicles on July 4th, 2016. The non-jury trial is expected to last 4 weeks. Deborah Naylor, Virgin Media News, at the Special Criminal Court.
The Garda Representative Association says it wants an urgent meeting with the Commissioner and Justice Minister following the anti-lockdown protest in Dublin over the weekend, during which 3 Gardaí were injured. The association, which represents rank and file members, has also called for Gardaí to be pushed up the vaccination queue.
A much more civilised Grafton Street this afternoon compared to the scenes here on Saturday when violence erupted during an anti-lockdown protest. Over 1,000 demonstrators gathered in the city centre on Saturday. Some protesters directed fireworks at Gardaí, one using a cannon launcher which would hold a number of fireworks. It's understood that arrests in relation to that activity are imminent. 3 Gardaí were injured, one hospitalised with a perforated eardrum and a broken ankle, which will require surgery later in the week. 125 members of the Gardaí were initially involved in the operation. 23 people were arrested at the protests. 13 appeared before the district court on charges under the Public Order Act on Saturday night. Rank and file Gardaí say the time has come for more backup for officers in the event that this escalates, and as frontline workers they want to be vaccinated without delay.
For members of the Garda Síochána that I represent, there is a lot of anger in terms of the resources that are available to us in order to carry out our duties. We need action now in the form of prioritising Gardaí on the front line for the vaccination programme. It simply isn't good enough that the government haven't prioritised guards. That has to happen immediately, and in addition to that, we need adequate resources in terms of an extra budget to cope with the strains that the COVID pandemic has put to the policing operations around the country.
The GRA says an element within Saturday's protest had one motive, and that was to inflict harm on the Gardaí. Rank and file officers are seeking a meeting with the Minister for Justice and the Garda Commissioner in the coming days to discuss these issues. They'll be calling for a dedicated public order unit based in Dublin to respond to and deal with threats like this in the future. In the meantime, the investigation into the violence at the protest continues. An incident room has been set up at Pearse Street Garda Station. Sarah O'Connor, Virgin Media News.
Gardaí have launched an appeal for information following the discovery of skeletal remains in Cork. They were found at a building site on the Middleton to Youghal Greenway in January. It's thought the remains are that of a female in her 70s.
It was here at the former Middleton to Youghal railway line that a skull was first found last January by construction crews working on a new greenway. Further intensive searching uncovered the full skeletal remains of a woman, as well as a nitress. DNA tests have so far failed to come up with a positive match.
Someone in the community must know how the female skeletal remains came to be at this locally known tipping point off the Shanty Path at Roxborough, Middleton, County Cork. And Garda Síochána are determined to formally identify deceased and treat her with the respect and dignity that she deserves. We need to provide closure for a family that, at this early stage, remain unknown, and ensure that the remains are brought to a final resting place.
The remains, it's thought, could have lay undiscovered among the rough terrain for up to 10 years.
The initial post-mortem examination results indicated that the remains are of a female, 70 plus years old at the time of death, 5 foot to 5'2" in height, large framed, wore dentures and suffered from arthritis. The deceased was wearing a white faded garment similar to a nightdress type garment on the upper part.
This criminal investigation is being afforded the same level of resources to that of a murder inquiry.
A number of statements have been taken, and carbon dating and all available scientific resources have been engaged as part of this investigation.
Information can be shared with detectives at Middleton Garda Station or the Garda Confidential line on 1800 666 111. The remains of the unknown woman are currently being held at the morgue at Cork University Hospital. When the remains were first found, there was much speculation as to who the person may have been. But Gardaí say they don't deal in speculation, they go on hard evidence. And detectives will continue to seek such information until they solve the mystery. Paul Byrne, Virgin Media News, East Cork.
Now, coming up next on the news at 5:30, the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is found guilty of corruption. And in sport, Irish racing authorities condemn a photo of Gordon Elliott sitting on a dead horse.
We don't need too much to live. We don't need to share stories or make art or place bids. We don't need to stare into space and expand our minds. We don't need to make love or make music or make time. Cause the sun still shines, even if we miss the sun's rise. You don't need to drive, you don't need it to live. Just
The Cooper Fermentor e-hybrid.
The Sports Direct Back to School sale is now on. Save up to 70% on trainers, jackets, shoes and backpacks. Shop online